Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we continue our focus on Rogal Dorn, with his opinion of each one of his brother Primarchs. Obviously a general spoiler warning to begin here, as we will be referencing events from across the Warhammer 40k universe, and in particular the Horus Heresy. And as usual, we'll be focusing on what we know from the novels. I try my best to go back and find any references that I can, but just keep in mind I'm only human, and there may be things I've forgotten, missed, or simply never seen, but I try my best. And if you missed part 1, make sure to go back and give that a listen first, as there we covered the first, Lionel Johnson, through to the 10th Primarch, Ferrus Manus. However, with that all out the way, let's begin with the next Primarch, Angron. Now, much like when we saw Perturabo dealing with Angron, any Rogal and Angron relationship really feels like the irresistible force and immovable object. Two complete polar opposites. Given that difference, you'd expect them to not get on. However, Rogal for me isn't the kind of man to not give someone a chance, especially a brother Primarch. And there is a very brief reference of Dorn, Lorgar and Angron speaking together at the Ulanor summit within the novel A Thousand Suns. So as any Primarch, they were at least cordial enough to hold a conversation. However, let's be honest, that is a very minor reference, and given the man of discipline, control and restraint that Rogal is, you'd imagine his opinion of Angron wasn't the best. And indeed, there's a brief reference in the Lightning Tower that might imply that. As Dorn is contemplating his fears, he goes over his brother Primarchs, and it becomes very clear, not only does he not fear Angron, he doesn't appear to have even liked him. What was he afraid of? Who was he afraid of? Angron? Not him. Dorn would split his head without compunction if they came face to face. So it's not much, but that added without compunction certainly reveals a former distaste, that there would be no hesitation on Rogal's part. And this is perhaps further reinforced within the novel The Master of Mankind, where Dorn singles out Angron as an example of his scorn. "You believe that my men cannot be trusted?" Dorn replied perfectly calm. That they would turn their coats as Angron's dogs turned. And this is just a conversation with the Custodes about the Imperial fists not being allowed in the Imperial dungeon. So Rogal naming Angron in particular here has no particular reason other than the personal, because surely Horus is the larger, more painful betrayal to mention. And so for me, these small little slights and scornful remarks by Rogal really reveal a particularly low opinion of Angron, one that's probably been there for far longer than the outbreak of the heresy. However, moving on, next we have Roboute Guilliman. Now, how on earth we have never received a proper scene with these two together, I will never know. The respect between these two Primarchs was absolute. In the novel Scars, when questioning the loyalty of the Primarchs not yet at the throne world, Rogal adamantly refuses to believe Guilliman could be traitor. And I will not believe it of Roboute. In the short story The Lightning Tower, when speaking with his son Arcamus, he seemingly agrees with him that Guilliman could have stopped Horus if he were not stuck on the eastern fringe. Guilliman will stop him. Roboute is far away. And in Master of Mankind, arguing with a Sister of Silence, Rogal reveals he thinks Guilliman would in fact be Lord Commander over him. "You quote my own brother at me." Dorn narrowed his gaze. "Roboute is not here, Oblivion Knight. Would that he were. In his absence, I am Lord Commander of the Imperium." And there's also the personal aspect here, that in all of these references, Rogal has referred to Guilliman as Roboute, not the less informal Guilliman. And throughout the Siege of Terror, Rogal really has no doubt Guilliman will come, and that everything he does is arranged for that very outcome, buying time for the Ultramarines to arrive, only ever conceding the notion when it reaches the final gambit, when Guilliman hasn't arrived in time. So it's clear Rogal holds Guilliman in the highest of esteems, making it all the more criminal we've never seen why. How this trust and respect was forged between them, the more personal side of the friendship. Considering we know how sour things will turn out between them in the Scouring, with Rogal's opposition to the Codex, hopefully we'll see some flashbacks to the Crusade era in the future. However, this was most definitely among Rogal's best friendships. But moving on, next we have Mortarion. Now unfortunately, there is pretty much nothing in regards to Mortarion and Rogal within the novels. So this one is pretty much left to guesswork based on what we know. For me, although Mortarion's dour attitude left him with very few friendships, with him generally disliking most of his brothers, I would have thought Rogal was one of the lesser ones he would have had a problem with, even if they weren't exactly friends. Rogal wouldn't have particularly liked Mortarion's extreme methods of obliteration on the battlefield, but I think he would have definitely have respected the insane durability of Mortarion and his legion. And Rogal too has made his aversion to sorcery known a few times too. We know Mortarion's outright hostility towards it, so there's another tentative area of common ground to some degree there too. So no, they weren't friends, as Mortarion only had a few, but I think the two could have been cordial and respectful, with each of them seeing the strengths the other possessed. However, that's about it. Moving on to a Primarch I actually noticed I missed when recording this, Magnus the Red. And that's probably because I copied the Order of Primarchs list from my Magnus's opinion list we did the other week. However, I digress. Magnus and Rogal were obviously very different in nature. However, Magnus was generally quite well liked by most of his brothers, having a very warm and friendly manner for the most part. And there is a moment where Dorn laments Magnus's mistakes to himself in the novel The Master of Mankind, which does reveal a seeming bit of sorrow on Rogal's part. Dorn looked back to the overcast sky. His voice was softened by the moment's immensity. "Magnus, my brother, of all your mistakes, this one is by far the most grievous." Maybe it's just me, but it definitely feels like there's a bit of sorrow there in Rogal's words. However, there is also a pretty condemning comment made by him also, when Leman Russ is remarking about how effective psychic power is against the ruinous powers in the novel Wolfsbane. "I think you are reckless. I think you are in danger of treading the same road as Magnus, or Lorgar, cavorting with priests. Where has your conviction gone? Where is the wolf who spoke at Nicaea? This stung Russ, and his smile dropped. Nicaea was another trick, another manipulation. Why do you think our enemies duped us into abandoning the Librarius? Why do you think I was tricked into killing Magnus? You express regret for that now, said Dorn. Last I heard you were crowing about it. I have crowed. I do crow. I am proud of what I did. When attacked, Magnus resorted to powers he should never have unleashed, and he deserved what he got for that alone. But things could have been different. Horus lied to me because they fear the powers of the warp. He feared Magnus's sorcery. It is what the enemy are. It is what will beat them. Dorn sighed sadly and looked down at his slate of plans. And that is Magnus talking. And so, even in these brief two little comments here, you can kind of see the signs of a fondness Rogal had for Magnus, yet also that condemnation. And it's a bit of a familiar theme when it comes to Magnus. How he was liked generally for his personality, but it was that unbridled arrogance he had when it came to his power. That just seemed to switch his brothers off a little. Had them concerned for him, viewing him as arrogant. And I think that was most likely Dorn's view as well. A personal affection, but seeing Magnus as the master of his own fate. Too arrogant, and delving into realms he was told to leave alone. But moving on, next we have Horus Lupercal. Rogal quite simply loved Horus, as most of the Primarchs did, seeing him as the rightful choice for War Master. At Ulanor, when Horus was anointed as War Master, Rogal was one of the few Primarchs with no jealousy. Happy even, as mentioned by Sanguinius in Fear to Tread. And Lorgar and Fulgrim, his brother, continued. Did you not hear them cheer with me when Father said the words? When he named you Supreme Commander? The others were an echo behind. They feel the same. I'm sure if Rogal were not so stiff, he would have done so as well. Dorn did shake my hand. From the Imperial fist, that's practically an outburst of joy. And in the short story The Lightning Tower, we see in Dorn's inner thoughts that he always classed Horus as the greatest of them. Horus then. Was it Horus? Perhaps. Dorn knew that Horus was the greatest of them, which made him the gravest foe. Could any one of them hope to best Lupercal on the field of war? Martial prowess was hardly the point. Dorn had never feared an adversary in his life because of how strong he was or how hard he fought. Combat was only ever a test. What mattered, what engendered fear, was why an adversary fought. What made him fight? Oh, now we have it. Now the truth dawns. He felt the hairs on his skin rise. I'm not afraid of Horus. I'm afraid of finding out why he has turned against us. I cannot conceive of any justification for this schism, but Horus must have had his reasons. I am afraid that when I know them, when they are explained to my baffled mind, I might agree. Now that is a huge sign of how highly Rogal valued him, that he's in truth concerned about finding out why Horus turned traitor. Because if Horus Lupercal did, Rogal might agree. And all the way back in Horus Rising, the very first installment of the Horus Heresy series, we get a moment of Rogal greeting Horus warmly, a rarity for Rogal, and a reference to Rogal being close counsel for Horus as the new War Master. So Rogal loved Horus Lupercal, as you'd expect, and he respected him greatly, viewing him as the greatest of the brothers and rightful War Master. Next up we have the Urizen Lorgar. Now we have that brief reference I mentioned earlier of Rogal speaking to Lorgar with Angron at Ulanor, and I think Rogal would have been perfectly polite and cordial with the Urizen. However, I do think Rogal would have despised Lorgar's religious worship. And I think that reference we mentioned earlier when speaking to Russ about Lorgar cavorting with priests pretty much sums that up. You combine that with Lorgar's reputation in the early Crusade as being a very slow legion, and Lorgar himself being quite emotional, certainly looked down on by Roboute, a close friend of Rogal and very similar to him in outlook. Well then, I think Rogal would have had a fairly disapproving opinion of him, much along the same lines as Guilliman. Not ever a hatred, far from it in fact, but just a general disapproving opinion of Lorgar. That quite simply, he should be doing better. Another one we don't have much to go by, most certainly not in the Crusade era, that's for sure. But moving on, next we have Vulkan. Now Vulkan and Rogal had a good solid friendship as brothers, as can be seen in their reunion within Old Earth, one of my favourite moments of the Heresy. "You come at a most inauspicious time," said Dorn, his voice harsh and thunderous, where Vulkan's was deep and resonant. Vulkan crossed the 100 paces separating him from his brother. Though he could not see them, he felt the many pairs of eyes upon him, watching from somewhere in the shadowy arcade that delineated the square. Upon reaching Dorn, he smiled warmly. "It is good to see you, Rogal." Dorn nodded, ever reserved. He sheathed his sword, and at this signal from their Primarch, Vulkan heard the sound of 20 Imperial fists disengaging and powering down their weapons. "You look older, brother," said Vulkan. "And you are no different from the day we met," Dorn answered coolly. "I heard you had died." His annoyance at being called away from his numerous duties and responsibilities faded, though Vulkan could see the burden still weighed heavily. "I have longed to see my brothers again, the ones not trying to kill me." Dorn's jaw stiffened at that remark, suggesting some unspoken pain or regret. Vulkan did not press him. Some truths were best left unsaid. "I would embrace you," Vulkan confessed. "But that was never your way, was it, Rogal?" Dorn laughed gruffly. Abstention is a wise decision. Vulkan embraced him firmly anyway, and felt his affection for his brother returned, albeit awkwardly. As they parted, the smile did not quite reach Dorn's eyes, though the expression was not unkind. "I am glad you live. Of late, I have found precious little to celebrate." I always loved this moment. Vulkan giving the big bro hug despite knowing Rogal doesn't like them. And you can just feel Rogal's contentment at seeing his brother Vulkan. A small moment of respite, dare I say comfort, amid all the strain and darkness. This was a solid friendship, a solid brotherhood. The Praetorian and the Lord of Drakes got along well. Moving on, next we have Corax. Now, much like we just discussed for Vulkan, we received a scene of Rogal and Corax together upon Corax's own arrival to the throne world, post-Istvan, within the novel Deliverance Lost. Though there was no Vulkan bro hugs being offered around, it's clear Rogal was happy to see the Raven Lord. "Brother," Dorn called out with a hand raised in greeting, his voice booming down the hall, disturbing the air of quiet reverence. The two Primarchs met and clasped wrist to wrist in welcome. Dorn slapped a hand to Corax's shoulder and smiled briefly. "I promised I would be here today," said Dorn. "As ever, your word is secure as the fortresses you raise," replied Corax, stepping back and releasing his grip on his Gene brother. Now the two end up having a bit of an argument after a while here, at Rogal wanting the Raven Guard to stay on Terra, and Corax not being allowed to see the Emperor, which gets stopped by the Emperor himself, quite amusingly scolding Rogal and Corax for arguing in his palace, like a father scolding his arguing kids. But it's clear Rogal and Corax had a good relationship, despite their very different natures. But now, finally, we have Alpharius. Now, Rogal had no love lost for Alpharius, and thanks to the novel Praetorian of Dawn, we can see it firsthand. After arriving to assist Rogal and his legion upon a campaign, Alpharius would only meet Rogal in its aftermath, attempting to deceive his brother with two other Alpha legionaries, of course pretending to be him. It was a charade that Rogal had little time for, and one that he saw through, correctly seeing the true Alpharius. And Rogal was furious with Alpharius for his conduct during the campaign, his methods in general, and he made sure that Alpharius knew it, even point-blankly telling his brother, "Try my patience again, and I won't stay my hand." There is none of the warmth we saw in his reunion with Vulkan or Corax, and it's clear Rogal pretty much despised him. "You will withdraw your forces from this world," said Dorn. "All of them. The agents and operatives too. I know that you use them, and I know how. I will be looking for them, and if I find any, they will not be spared." "You will not find any," said Alpharius. Dorn shook his head and began to turn towards the door. Arcamus moved with him. He could feel the pressure of his lord's anger aching through the air, like cold from a glacier. Dorn stopped at the door and turned back. "Your initial strikes were misdirected," he said to Alpharius. "You infiltrated one hive and made it fall by systemic destabilizing of authority. But you should have waited. You could have used it as a node from which to disperse your human operatives and agents into the other hives. You managed that to a degree, but you could have forced a total collapse in their defenses across the planet, not just surrender by assassination. That move was also mistimed. Another 37 hours, and the pressure from our assault would have been eroding their ability to communicate. Secondary psychological fear, doubt and confusion would have been rising to a peak. You could have ridden that, played and controlled its pace, forcing hives to fall, or change sides at the exact moment when it would amplify whatever effects you wanted. What you did was effective, but it was not optimally so, by your own criteria. Dorn stared at Alpharius, but the Alpha Legion Primarch did not reply. "I know you, brother," continued Dorn. "I knew that you were here before I walked through the door. I knew it was you on that throne, not because you made an error in your masquerade. You made no mistake, yet I still knew it was you. Think on that, brother. It is not that I do not understand what you are, or what you do. I understand both. We are what we choose to be. And we know what would transpire in their later heresy encounter. Alpharius trying to speak to Rogal as they fought, and Rogal refusing to reply, ultimately eviscerating his brother with no hesitation. Though it's clear in the aftermath, killing a brother was no easy thing for Rogal. If there's one thing Praetorian of Dawn makes clear, it's that he never had a good relationship at all with Alpharius. But that's it. That is Rogal's opinion of each and every one of his brother Primarchs. As always everyone, what do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. A huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too? But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.